It began to dawn on Peter that he had no punishment to fear now, and that the good lady sitting before him had rescued him from the power of the policeman. Then he felt as relieved as if a mountain which was almost crushing him had been taken away from him. He also understood now that it is better to confess one's faults, and he at once said, "And I lost the paper too." The grandmamma had to reflect a little, but she soon remembered and said kindly, "There, that is right to tell me about it. Always confess what is wrong, then it will be settled. Now, what should you like to have?" Now Peter could choose anything in the world that he would like to have. It almost made him dizzy. The whole fair at Mainfeld came before his eyes, with all the beautiful things which he had looked at for hours and had thought he could never have. For Peter's possessions had never gone beyond 1 penny, and such attractive objects always cost double that amount. There were the lovely red whistles, which he could use so well for his goats. Then there were the fascinating round-handled knives with which he could do a thriving business on the neighboring hazel-rod hedges. Peter stood deep in thought, for he was considering which of the two was a more desirable, and he could not decide. Then a bright idea came to him. By this means he could think it over until the next fair. 2 cents, replied Peter decidedly. The grandmamma laughed a little. "Oh, that's not too much, so come here." Then she opened her purse and took out a great round dollar. On it she laid 4 pennies. "There. We will count it out exactly," she continued. "I will explain it to you. Here you have twice as many pennies as there are weeks in the year, so you can take 2 out to use every Sunday the whole year through." "All my life long?" asked Peter quite innocently. And then the grandmamma had such a fit of laughter that the gentleman yonder had to stop talking to hear what was going on. And the grandmamma kept on laughing. "You shall have it, my boy. I will put it in my will. Do you hear, my son? And then it will be handed over to you thus. The goat herd Peter 2 pennies weekly as long as he lives." And Herr Sesemann nodded in assent and laughed too at the idea. Peter looked again at the present in his hand to see if it were really true. Then he said, "God bless you." And he ran away, making extraordinary leaps, but this time he stayed on his feet, for now he was not driven by fear, but by a delight such as he had never known before in all his life. All his suffering and fear had disappeared, and he could expect 2 pennies every week, all his life long. Later, when the company in front of the arm hut had ended their happy midday meal and were still sitting together talking about all sorts of things, Clara took her father's hand, and, while his face beamed with delight, said with an enthusiasm which had never been known in the old-time, feeble Clara, "Oh, Papa, if you only knew all that the grandfather has done for me. So much every day that I can't tell you about it, but I shall never forget it in my life. I'm always thinking, if I could only do something for the dear grandfather, or give him something to make him as happy, or even half as happy as he has made me." "This is my greatest desire also, my dear child," said her father. "I'm continually thinking how we can prove our gratitude in some measure to our kind friend." Herr Sesemann then rose and went to the uncle who was sitting beside the grandmamma and was having an unusually pleasant talk with her. He also rose, and Herr Sesemann grasped his hand and said in a most friendly way, "My dear friend, let us have a word together. You will understand me when I tell you that for many long years I have had no real happiness. What were all my money and wealth to me when I looked at my poor child, whom I could not make well and happy with all my riches? Next to our God in heaven, you have made the child well for me, and given new life to me also. Now tell me, how can I show my gratitude to you? I can never repay you for what you have done for us, but whatever is in my power, I place at your disposal. Tell me, my friend, what I can do." The uncle had listened in silence and watched the happy father with a smile of contentment. "Herr Sesemann, believe me, I also have my share in the great joy at the recovery on our arm. My work has been well rewarded," said the uncle in his decided way. "I thank you, Herr Sesemann, for your kind offer, but there is nothing that I need. As long as I live, I have enough for the child and myself. But I have one wish. If I could have that granted, I should have no more worry during my life." Name it, my dear friend," urged Herr Sesemann. "I am old," continued the uncle, "and cannot live here much longer. When I go, I cannot leave the child anything, and she has no relatives, only one single person, and that person would take advantage of her. If Herr Sesemann would give me the assurance that Heidi would never in her life have to go out among strangers to seek her bread, then he would have richly rewarded me for what I have done for him and his child." "But, my dear friend, that goes without saying," Herr Sesemann burst forth. "The child belongs to us. Ask my mother, my daughter. The child Heidi will never be left to other people. But if it will be any comfort to you, my friend, here is my hand on it. I promise you, never in her life shall this child go out to earn her bread among strangers. I will see to that as long as I live. I will say even more. This child is not made for life in a strange land, whatever might happen. We have seen that. But she has made friends. I know one who is in Frankfurt. He's settling up his business there in order to go later on wherever he likes and take a rest. It is my friend the doctor. And he's coming up here again this autumn, and taking your advice will settle in this region, for he found more pleasure in your company and the child's than anywhere else. So you see, the child Heidi will have two protectors near her. May they both be preserved to her for a long, long time." "The dear Lord grant that it may be so," the grandmamma added, and confirming her son's wish, she shook the uncle's hand heartily for a long time. Then she suddenly threw her arms around Heidi's neck as she was standing beside her and drew her toward her. "And you, my dear Heidi, we must also ask you a question. Come. Tell me, if you have a wish which you would like to have granted." "Yes, indeed I have," answered Heidi, looking very much delighted at the grandmamma. "Well, that is right. Speak it out," she said encouragingly. "What should you like to have, my child?" "I should like to have my bed in Frankfurt with the 3 thick pillows and the thick quilt, for then the grandmother would not have to lie with her head downhill so that she can hardly breathe, and she would be warm enough under the quilt and wouldn't always have to go to bed with a shawl on because she is terribly cold." Heidi said this all in one breath in her eagerness to obtain what she so much desired. "Oh, my dear Heidi, what are you telling me?" exclaimed the grandmamma in excitement. "It is a good thing that you remind me. In our joy we easily forget what we ought to think of most. When the dear Lord sends us something good, we ought at once to think of those who are in need. We will telegraph immediately to Frankfurt. Rottenmeier shall have the bed packed up this very day, and in 2 more days it will be here. God willing, the grandmother shall sleep well in it." Heidi danced merrily around the grandmamma, but all at once she stood still and said hurriedly, "I must really go as fast as I can down to the grandmother's. She will be troubled because I haven't been there for a long time." for Heidi could not wait any longer to carry the joyful message to the grandmother, and it also came to her mind again how troubled she had been when Heidi was not there last. "No, no, Heidi, what are you thinking about?" said her grandfather reprovingly. "When one has visitors, one doesn't run away from them all of a sudden." But the grandmamma took Heidi's part. "My dear uncle, the child is not wrong. The poor grandmother has been a loser for a long time, in my opinion. Now we will all go together to see her, and I think I will wait for my horse there, and then we will continue our way, and we can send the telegram at once to Frankfurt from Derfli. My son, what do you think of it?" Herr Sesemann had not had time before to speak about his plans, so he had to ask his mother not to start away at once, but to sit still a little longer, until he had told her what he intended to do. Herr Sesemann had proposed to take a little journey through Switzerland with his mother, and first to see whether his little Clara was in a condition to travel a short distance with them. Now it had so happened that he saw he could take the enjoyable journey in company with his little daughter, and he was anxious to take advantage at once of these lovely late summer days. He had in mind to spend the night in Derfli, and on the following morning to take Clara away from the Alm, to go with her to meet her grandmamma down in Ragaz, and from there to travel on further. Clara was a little disturbed to hear of this sudden departure from the Alm, but there were many other things to be happy about, and besides there was no time to give way to grief. The grandmamma had already risen and had grasped Heidi's hand to lead the way. Then all of a sudden she turned around. "But what in the world will you do with Clarikin?" she exclaimed in alarm, for it had occurred to her that the walk would be much too long for one who had been ill. But the uncle had already taken his little charge in his usual way in his arms, and was following the grandmamma with firm steps, and she nodded back to him with satisfaction. Last came Herr Sesemann, and so the procession went on down the mountain. Heidi could not help dancing with delight as she went along by the side of the grandmamma, who wanted to know everything about the grandmother, how she lived, and how the family got along, especially in winter, during the severely cold weather up there. Heidi told her about everything, for she knew how they managed and how the grandmother sat bowed over her corner and trembled with the cold. She also knew very well what they had to eat and what they did not have to eat. The grandmamma listened with the liveliest interest to all that Heidi had to tell her until they reached the hut. Brigidy was just hanging out Peter's second shirt in the sun, so that when his other one had been worn long enough he could change it. She noticed the people and rushed into the house. "They're all going away now, Mother," she said. "There's a whole procession of them. The uncle is with them, and he's carrying the sick child." "Oh, must it really be?" sighed the grandmother. "Did you see whether they're taking Heidi with them? Oh, if she would only give me her hand once more! If I could only hear her voice once again!" Now the door was suddenly flung open as if by a whirlwind, and Heidi came springing into the corner where the grandmother was, and threw her arms around her neck. "Grandmother! Grandmother! My bed is coming from Frankfurt with all 3 pillows and the thick quilt, too. In 2 days it'll be here. The grandmamma said so." Heidi could hardly bring out her message fast enough, for she could scarcely wait to see the grandmother's great delight. She smiled, but there was sadness in her voice as she said, "Oh, what a good lady she is! I ought to be glad that she is going to take you with her, Heidi, but I shall not live long after it." "What? What? Who said such a thing to the good old grandmother?" asked a friendly voice here, and the old dame's hand was grasped and heartily pressed, for the grandmamma had come in and heard everything. "No, no, it is no such thing. Heidi will stay with the grandmother and make her happy. We shall want to see the child again, and we will come up to her. We shall come up to the Alm every year, for we have reason to offer our special thanks to the Lord annually in this place where such a miracle has been done to our child." Then the true light of joy came into the grandmother's face, and with speechless thanks she pressed the good Frau Sesamann's hand again and again, while great tears of joy glided down her aged cheeks. Heidi at once noticed the joyful light in the grandmother's face and was quite happy. Truly, grandmother, she said, pressing close to her, it has come just as I read to you the last time. Really, the bed from Frankfurt is wholesome, isn't it? Oh, yes, Heidi, and so much, much more. So much good the dear Lord has done for me, said the grandmother, deeply moved. How is it possible that there are such good people who trouble themselves about a poor old woman and do so much for her? There is nothing that can so strengthen one's belief in a good Father in heaven who will not forget even the lowliest as to learn that there are such people full of goodness and pity for the poor, worthless woman such as I am. My good grandmother, broke in Frau Sesemann, before our Father in heaven we are all equally poor, and it is equally necessary to all of us that he should not forget us, and now we must leave you. But we hope to see you again, for as soon as we can come back next year to the Alm, we shall try to find the grandmother once more. She will never be forgotten. Whereupon Frau Sesemann grasped the old grandmother's hand again and shook it. But she did not get away so quickly as she intended, for the grandmother could not stop thanking her and wishing all the good that the dear Lord had it in his power to give for the kind friend and all her household. Then Herr Sesemann went down toward the valley with his mother, while the uncle carried Clara back home once more, and Heidi was out without pausing, jumped high as she went beside, for she was so pleased with what the grandmother could look forward to that she had the jump at every step. But the following morning, Clara shed hot tears because she had to go away from the beautiful Alm, where she had been better than she had ever been before in all her life. But Heidi comforted her and said, "It will be summer again in no time, and then you will come back, and then it will be more beautiful than ever. Then you can walk all the time, and we can go up to the pasture with the goats every day and see the flowers, and everything will be jolly from the very first." Herr Sesemann came, according to the agreement, to get his little daughter. He was standing with the grandfather, for the men had all sorts of things to talk over, and Clara was wiping away her tears. And Heidi's words had comforted her a little. "I will leave a greeting for Peter," Clara said, "and for all the goats, especially Schwandli. Oh, if only I could make Schwandli a present. She has helped so much to make me well." "You can do that very easily," asserted Heidi. "Only send her a little salt. You know how gladly she licks the salt from grandfather's hand at night." The advice pleased Clara very much. "Oh, then I will certainly send her 100 pounds of salt from Frankfurt," she cried with delight. "She, too, must have a remembrance from me." Herr Sesemann then beckoned to the children, for he wished to start. This time the grandmamma's white horse came for Clara, and she was now able to ride down. She no longer needed a sedan chair. Heidi stationed herself at the extreme edge of the slope and waved her hand to Clara until the last speck of horse and rider disappeared. The bed came, and the grandmother still sleeps so well in it that she is really gaining new strength. The kind grandmamma did not forget the hard winter on the mountain. She had a case sent to goatherd Peter's house. There were many warm things packed in it, in which the grandmother could wrap herself up, and now she never has to sit any more shivering with cold in the corner. There's a large building in progress in Thurfley. The doctor has come and has taken up his old quarters. Through the advice of his friend, he purchased the old building where the uncle lived with Heidi in the winter, and which had been once a great mansion, as could still be seen from the lofty room with the handsome stove and the artistic panelling. This part of the house the doctor is having rebuilt for his own dwelling. The other side is being restored as winter quarters for the uncle and Heidi, for the doctor knew the old man was independent and would want to have his own house. Back of it is a firmly built, warm goat shed where Schwandli and Barley can spend their winter days most comfortably. The doctor and the uncle are becoming better friends every day, and when they climb together about the building to look after the progress of the work, their thoughts turn mostly to Heidi, for to both of them the chief joy in the house is that they will be together with their happy child. My dear uncle, said the doctor the other day as he was standing on the wall with the old man, you must look at the matter as I do. I share all joy in the child with you, as if next to you I were the one to whom the child belongs. I will share all expenses and care for the child as well as I know how. So I've also my rights in our Heidi, and can hope that she will care for me in my old age and stay with me. This is my greatest desire. Heidi shall share in my property as my own child, so we can leave her without any worry when we have to go away from her, you and I. The uncle pressed the doctor's hand for a long time. He spoke not a word, but his good friend could read in the old man's eyes the emotion and great delight which his words had aroused. Meanwhile, Heidi and Peter were sitting with the grandmother, and the first had so much to relate, and the other so much to listen to, that they could hardly get their breath, and in their eagerness kept getting nearer and nearer to the happy grandmother. There was a great deal to talk about regarding the events of the summer, for they had been together very little all this time, and each of the three looked happier than the other at being together again, and because of the wonderful things that had taken place. But the face of Mother Brigady looked almost the happiest, for with Heidi's help she now for the first time understood clearly the story of the continual pennies. Finally the grandmother said, Heidi, read me a song of praise and thanksgiving. I feel like praising and glorifying our Lord in heaven and giving him thanks for all that he has done for us.